G'day guys, Jake here. How are you all going? I hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be taking you through an introduction to Linux. Now, Linux is a free open source operating system. So unlike Windows, which you don't have access to the source code and you can't manipulate it and everything like that, Linux gives you access to the source code and you can manipulate it, or many people can manipulate it. And that's basically what it is. It's POSIX compliant, which means that it goes like the commands that work on Unix will work on Linux. Now, Unix and Linux are not the same operating system. They are completely different, except that a lot of the commands are the same. Linux was built by a bloke named Linus Torvalds, and he just decided that he wanted it to be Unix-like, but he wanted his own operating system that he was free to do whatever he wanted with, and that other people were free to do whatever they wanted with. And when I say it's free, it's not necessarily free to purchase or to use. There can be licensing costs, but it's free as in free to manipulate and free to do with what you want. Now, I'll be covering off a few different things in this little introduction. First, I'll be going through what the licensing means and how it's licensed and what it means to be free. The second thing I'll go through is distros. What are distros? A couple of different sorts of distros. Another thing I'll be going over is what is root and what's its importance and what it means. We'll also be talking about what's it actually used for, like who uses Linux and why do they use Linux. So if you just hang in there for a minute, we'll get started. So what does it mean to be open source and like free for people to use, and how is Linux licensed? So the Linux kernel is licensed under a thing called the GNU GPL license, which means that it's free to edit, free to manipulate, and free to redistribute. Now, I'm not going to go right in depth about this license because it does get sort of complex. You can read up about it. There's a link down there in the description if you want to go over the GNU GPL license and see what it is. But we'll just say that it's free to use, free to download, free to modify, and free to redistribute. But Linux is not necessarily licensed under that license. There's also a bunch of other licenses that different companies use for their versions of Linux. Now, when you are getting Linux, you want to make sure that you have a look at the license, because some of the licenses will require you to pay support fees or fees to use the license. So like some of the distros of Linux, when you use it, it's free to use and whatever in your own home, but then as soon as you put it into a business environment or start using it for business or corporations or anything like that, then there'll be licensing fees or support fees involved that you'll have to pay. Now, if you use this, and you can, but it's really, really not good, and you don't pay the licensing fees, then you leave yourself open to a breach of copyright, and people will be able to sue you and sue your business and wreak havoc on you, basically. But so the licensing is something that you want to pay attention to. Now, So now we're going to talk a little bit about distros. Distro is short for distribution. Now, a distribution is sort of like a different flavor of Linux. So some of the common ones are Red Hat, Debian, SUSE, Ubuntu, Fedora, and there's heaps more. Now, the different distros are made differently and commands will work differently in the different distros. Now, they've all got the same kernel, so they've all got the same underlying thing that makes them Linux, but all of the different front-end features are different. Some of the commands are different. They use different package managers and stuff, which we'll go over what that is later, and they may be licensed differently. So look, when you're thinking about using Linux, make sure that you pick the right distro. So do some research. You might want to look up like what you want to use Linux for. If you want to use Linux for a web server, you may choose CentOS. If you want to use Linux as a communication server, there's Asterisk for that, and there's many other things that will do many other things. But the different distros are designed to do different tasks. So they come with preloaded things, they come with some things not loaded. There's even distros that are just built to be really, really small. So there's some that like need barely any RAM and barely anything to run, and you'll be able to have your own little operating system. So now I'm going to talk about root. And what is root and what does it mean? So root basically means the thing with the highest level of privileges. Like, so there's a root user in Linux, and that is also known as the super user sometimes. And the root user can do anything. It's the boss. Like, it's sort of like your administrator in Windows, but it's got even higher level privileges than that. So if you want to edit something or delete something or create something in Linux, and you may need the root user to do that depending on how the security things are done for your version of Linux or your distro of Linux, as we said before. So that's pretty much what the root user is. Now, it's not recommended to log in as the root user for your everyday thing because you can break stuff basically. So most things will come with a different user, and then you just elevate the privileges to act like root. So there's a command in Linux called sudo, which will let you act as the root user. And root can also mean something else. In the file system, root means the highest directory. So the directory that your installation of Linux is on, so like in Windows, it'd be C:, would be the root directory, but in Linux it's not called that, it's called the root directory. So that's the highest directory in the operating system. So under the root directory, everything in Linux is. Before the root directory is nothing. So that's what the root directory is. But there's also like the root directory of the user, which will usually be like commonly under /user/username. And that'll be like your home directory will be in there, and above your home directory is your root directory. So here's the real question. What is Linux actually used for? A very, very common, well, two very common things that Linux is used for is the first one we'll talk about is mobile devices. So I'm sure you've heard of Android. It's becoming quite popular. It's on phones and tablets, and now they're even making desktops with Android. That's actually a Linux distro. And then from that, there's different versions of Android as well. So there's like distros in Android. Like they've forked Android for Amazon, have done it for their Kindle. And then there's, you know, Samsung have released their own little version of Android, and Google has their version. But yeah, so Android runs millions of devices now, and that's actually a Linux operating system. It's a Linux kernel running. They've made it run on different hardware. It's running on the ARM hardware, but it's still Linux. Another use that's very commonly used for Linux is servers. Now, many servers are ran on Linux that run websites. Like heaps of the internet is actually ran on Linux. Like you can get web hosting plans, all of those cheap web hosting plans that are like $5 a month. A lot of them are all Linux based because, you know, licensing fees and stuff are cut down, so therefore they're not worth as much, and it actually runs better than Windows Server for that sort of stuff. Because of the way Linux is built, it doesn't need to be rebooted all the time. Like with Windows servers, you need to reboot them all the time. They're always getting security updates and this and that. But with a Linux server, you just turn it on and leave it on until the hardware dies pretty much, as long as you've set it up right. If you haven't set it up right, well then no. But if you turn it on, set it all up right, and just leave it go, it just keeps going. It doesn't have memory leaks, and it doesn't, like the way that it writes to the disk is better. It doesn't need defragging and stuff. yeah, so that's pretty much why people use them for servers. Now, Linux also have desktop versions, which, to be honest, aren't as good as Mac and Windows. They lack certain features. They're a bit more difficult for the end user who's a non-technical user to use, but lately they have been getting better. But people do use them for their desktop operating systems, but it's not as commonly used in business as Windows. Like Windows just has an amazing amount of the market share compared to Linux. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.